It's time once again for a schooling. You see, while some think found footage is the easy way of making a horror movie, those who have attended this class before know that it's a little harder than that. There are specific things that distinguish a good found footager from a bad. I use my handy-dandy found footage form to gauge the authenticity of each film, and then I'll let you know if they're worth watching. So be sure to take notes. There's going to be a test later. Found Footage 101 is about to begin. Sanitarium, aka The Spirit Chaser, is streaming on Tubi. It's directed by Federico Alotto and written by Federico Alotto and Andrea Zirio. At the beginning of Sanitarium, there's an opening crawl explaining that a psychiatrist developed a way to recognize a psychotic mind through physical appearances. It then says that while experimenting with this theory, some kind of paranormal phenomena occurred, and that the footage we're about to watch has been put together by the authorities to make sense of an unsolved paranormal case. We then follow a guy named Dylan, played by Dylan Ayers, for the rest of the movie. Dylan met his new girlfriend in Italy and plans to marry her once he gets back to the UK. He also met his new best friend Mike, played by Piero Ali Passatore, who is a bit of a troublemaker, as he seems to have both a gambling problem and anger issues. When Mike loses a bet to a local Nazi sympathizer, he makes Mike stay in the woods for a night, as it is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a woman tortured to death in an insane asylum. Mike drags Dylan along, and Dylan films it all for his video blog. Things get pretty bad for the both of them, and eventually it all gets back to that opening blurb about the paranormal events and the psychotic patients. Eventually. Are the actors successfully acting like they aren't acting? For the most part, everyone feels authentic. Ayers and Passatore are not going to be winning any daytime Emmys for their performances, but as far as acting scared and panting a few inches away from the camera microphone, they do it well. Passatore has to justify some pretty erratic actions, which sometimes have no reason behind them, but this has as much to do with the bad writing as it does with bad acting. Does the footage found seem authentic and untouched by additional production? Sanitarium does rely on quite a few piano bangs and jump scares, sounds added to accentuate the scary moments. I think this takes away from the scares because it had me wondering where the synth player was hiding in the woods behind the camera. Light tones and synth sounds are also used to accentuate dramatic scenes, but for the most part, it's not as intrusive as most out there. It still isn't necessary, and I think the film would have been stronger without the added music in post. Why don't they just drop the camera and get the hell out of there? There is an actual scene where Dylan addresses this directly and says, "I'm going to document everything from here on out once things start getting paranormal." The reasoning isn't really made. These guys are in a life and death situation and really have no reason to keep filming other than, there wouldn't be a movie otherwise. So the excuse to film all of this is quite flimsy. Is there an up-nosed Blair Witch confessional or a wreck drag-away from the camera? Yep, there are both. Both Dylan and Mike address the camera for their method acting moments, addressing whoever finds this film. One of the actors is also dragged away from the camera, which was less annoying. Still, these overused found footage tropes should never be used in modern found footage, as doing so automatically indicates your movie is hacky and unimaginative. Does anything actually happen? Is the lead in too long and the payoff too short? Stuff happens. We're thrown into the woods fairly early on, and the guys happen upon a few creepy sights and sounds like a tree with baby dolls hanging on it and the old sanitarium where the occult and psychological experiments took place. While the actors say and do things in a random and often inexplicable manner, they at least keep the pace going and amp the intensity well as the final 45 minutes scoot along pretty nicely. Does this film add anything to the subgenre, and is it worth watching? Sanitarium isn't very original. It's a Blair Witch clone that adds very little to the subgenre of found footage. It isn't awful. It's always frightening to have a shaky cam make its way through an abandoned hospital, panning through the dark where around any corner, any kind of evil could pop out. This made for some intense moments and some legit scares, but there's nothing in this one that feels like something you and me haven't seen tons of times before. This is a good time waster of a movie, but not much more than that. The Blair Rabbit Project is available on Blu-ray and VHS from Future Video. I'll put the link down below where you can track this one down. It's directed and written by Kerry Pryor. 20-some years ago, a trio of filmmakers ventured out into the woods to find the truth about a local legend called the Blair Rabbit. After many groups of documentarians followed them and also went missing, their footage was never found. But now a new trio of investigators went out into the woods in search of this local legend, and their footage was found even though they went missing as well. This is that footage in this spoof of the classic found footage film, The Blair Witch Project. Are the actors successfully acting like they aren't acting? Being a direct knockoff of The Blair Witch Project, each of the three documentarians did a decent job of aping their counterparts, Josh, Mike, and Heather. Out of the three, Andrea Fears, as Andrea, does a dead-on Heather impression and is the true standout of this movie. She's the one taking things seriously, while the other two are goofing off, and I was thoroughly entertained with the way she put up with the antics of the other two documentarians she's been saddled with. And while Adam and Kerry are immature and constantly screw around, in the world of the film, they do a decent job with these roles. Does the footage found seem authentic and untouched by additional production? Up and until a very intentional departure from the found footage format, the Blair Rabbit Project, like the Blair Witch Project before it, uses no musical cues or sound bangs or jump scares. The footage has been inexplicably edited together, but that was the same case with the original, so I'll allow it. Why don't they just drop the camera and get the hell out of there? Well, they don't do that because they're making a spoof of the original Blair Witch Project. The reason they don't stop filming is because the guys are still making the film and not taking what's going on very seriously, until it's too late, that is. Is there an up-nosed Blair Witch confessional or a wreck drag-away from the camera? No drag-aways, since wreck hadn't been around at all at that time. But since this is a direct riff on the Blair Witch Project, you better believe they spoofed that famous scene, and it makes for one of the funnier gags in the movie. Does anything actually happen? Is the lead-in too long and the payoff too short? Unlike the original, there's a reveal of the monster they've been hunting for all through the film. It's goofy, with practical effects, and intentionally shifts the tone of the movie. While this is a departure from the original, it's a fun direction to go through, and makes for a much more satisfying end, albeit a ridiculous one. Does the film add anything to the subgenre, and is it worth watching? While spoofs of the Blair Witch Project have been done before, and the film established tropes that the found footage genre can't seem to get over or leave behind, the Blair Rabbit Project spoofs it all very well. These three actors are funny and talented. There were genuine moments where I laughed out loud, and very few moments of cringe parody often seen in the Scary Movie franchise. I especially loved the way the two guys continued to call Andrea actress, and one of the dudes keeps on slowly turning the camera towards her breasts whenever she's on screen, and later, when all hope is lost, asking if she would like to make a porno movie in their final moments alive. Yes, it's immature, but that still doesn't make it not funny. Sure, it's a goofy premise, but the film gets goofier and goofier the longer I watched, and I found nothing wrong with that. I recommend this one. Finally, there's Dagger, which is streaming on Tubi. It's directed by Matthew Butler-Hart and written by Matthew Butler-Hart, Tori Butler-Hart, and Graham Butler. Louise, played by Riz Maurice, and Thea, played by Ellie Duckles, are a pair of anonymous influencers whose shtick is to steal from the rich and donate to themselves. They plan a new heist at a fashion photo shoot at an old English mansion. Posing as craft services, the girls find themselves in the middle of a paranormal incident where the former owners of the mansion, a coven of ancient druids, return from the grave to take new souls. Are the actors successfully acting like they aren't acting? The acting in Dagger is actually quite solid. Now, if you've followed this channel, you know I'm not a fan of films about influencers, which is ironic because I guess I'm one of those sorts. But still, there's just something unlikable about people who try to become famous via extreme content. Louise and Thea are rather despicable people, as they seem to try to say they are pulling their antics for the sake of good, but somehow the two actors still pull off being likable leads. The actors in the photo shoot are okay as well, all playing things seriously and straight, especially when the druids show up and the bodies start falling. All in all, there's no complaints with me on the acting with this one. Does the footage found feel authentic and untouched by additional production? Dagger has a few subtle musical cues, which act more like constant background droning to set the tone, but most of the soundtrack's creepiness comes from the ever-present chanting by the druids, which indeed succeed in being offsetting. The multiple-angle way the story is edited together is explained away at the beginning, as they said investigators spliced the various footage together to get a better understanding of what went down. It's a bit of a cop-out to use multiple POVs, but Dagger does something interesting by basically grabbing one camera, watching what's going on that one until it gets to the present, and then starting anew with a new device that continues the tale. It's a rather inventive way to justify the different camera angles. Why don't they just drop the camera and get the hell out of there? While most of the time I feel there needs to be justification spoken aloud for the cameras to keep rolling, in Dagger, I think that the fact that these are influencers and they're very representational of their generation, meaning they have their phones basically recording and glued to their hands at every single moment of the day, I think that's an excuse enough that this footage was captured. Some of the people filming seem to be doing so simply because they're scared and don't even know that they're still filming. Is there an up-close Blair Witch confessional or a wreck drag away from the camera? Yeah, there are both. Even though the up-nose shot is done in jest, it's still one of the lamer antics the girls try to pull off in this one. The drag away, though, is not. The fact that Dagger has both in it, ironic attempt at comedy or not, is definitely points against this one. Does anything actually happen? Is the lead-in too long or the payoff too short? Dagger manages to tell a pretty solid Wicker Man-like folk horror story about outsiders stumbling into a town haunted by ancient evil druids. While the characters are somewhat annoying, the action occurs pretty much at the 20-minute mark and continues at a decent clip until the end. The ending is rather abrupt and involves a camera falling at just the right angle in order to capture the shot, but still, it was wrapped up in a decisive and creepy way. Does this film add anything to the subgenre, and is it worth watching? I thought Dagger was a decent little found footagers with likable characters, solid acting, creepy druids, and all kinds of strange paranormal stuff occurring. I do think that the film missed a fun opportunity in not using Louise and Thea's emoji mask filters all through the film. They use these filters because the content they post would get them arrested if their faces were shown, but because the installment of their show hasn't been edited, their real faces are revealed, and the emojis weren't used. Now, it might make for some goofy scenes, but if done competently, it would have made Dagger a much more interesting film if they left the emoji masks on them throughout the entirety of it. Of course, like Marvel movies, I feel that the necessity of showing the person behind the mask is one of the more annoying aspects of how vain people are in this day and age. As is, Dagger is a typical found footager with heavy heapings of folk horror, and I thought it was pretty good. Have you guys seen these found footage films? Are you gonna go watch them? Thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for the next Found Footage 101 class. Please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel, and ring that bell for notifications. You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're